14.5%, if I was to write it as a decimal, even though it looks like it's already a decimal because of the fact that there's a percent, it is considered a percent. So to make it an actual decimal without the percent, you need to move away from the percent symbol to the left. So that's 0.145. As a fraction, you would take that 145 and you would put it over 1,000. And if you remember the little shortcut, there's 1, 2, 3 place values that the number is in. So therefore you have 1, 2, 3 zeros, making it 1,000. Now, I am going to allow you to use a calculator next week. So in order to get the 145 1,000ths simplified, you are going to divide everything by, in this case, 5. And when we do that, 145 divided by 5 gives you 29. And 1,000 divided by 5 gives you 200. And that's your final answer, 29 over 200. For the decimal, 0.06, if we want to make it a percent, you are going to move towards the place that you want that percent symbol twice. So then you're going to have 6%. And to write it as a fraction, you write it again. There are 2 place values. So your denominator is going to have 2 zeros, and then you put the 6, which is the significant number, the important number. And then when you divide by 2 to the numerator and the denominator, you get 3 over 50. All right. The next one, 0.4%. It may look like a decimal to you because there's a decimal point, but because there's a percent, it means it's a percent. So you move away from the percent, 2 to the left, fill in that little extra blank with a 0, and it's really 0.004 or just 0.004. And that, as a fraction, would be 4 over, we have 1, 2, 3 place values. So you have 1, 2, 3 zeros. 4 over 1,000 simplifies to 2 over 500, which then can be simplified even further to 1 over 250. So the question was asked as to whether you can go from a percent to a fraction, and you sure can. So you can actually go from the percent, 0.4%. If you wrote 0.4% as it looks like that, remember you can't have a decimal within a fraction, so you're allowed to do anything to the numerator in terms of moving the decimal point, as long as you do the same thing to the denominator, because it's essentially the same thing as multiplying by 10. So if you move it over 1, you get 4 over 1,000, which can then be simplified to that number that we did, which was 1 over 250. So hopefully that answered the question. You can go straight from a percent into a fraction, as long as you write it over 100, and then you move the decimal place the same number of spaces to the numerator as you do to the denominator to get rid of the point. For the decimal, 5.445, if I was to write it as a percent, it means you want to get a percent symbol to the right. So you're going to move to the right twice. And when you do that, you get 544.5%. To write it as a fraction, remember that's a whole number, 5 and 445 over 1,000. Don't write 5 over 4. It's 5, the whole number, and 445. There's 3 place values, so you have 3 zeros. And now you can simplify the 445 and the 1,000 by dividing by 5, and you get 445 divided by 5 is 89. And 1,000 divided by 5 is 200. But don't forget that 5 is still there because it's a whole number, 5 and. All right. 2/3. When you have 2/3, you know, or any fraction, that every fraction is really a division problem. So when you are going to actually do the math, you are going to do 2 divided by 3. And if you use your calculator, 2 divided by 3 would give you 0.6 repeating. That's the decimal. .6 repeating. And then to write it as a percent, the biggest mistake I see people make is that they think that the 0.6 is just that 6 there. They may write it with that little repeating bar, but when they go to move the decimal point over, they think it's 60. There's lots of 6's here, right? So when you move it over 2 to the right, your percent's going to be 66.6 repeating percent. And if you remember, a repeating decimal is really like a fraction over 9. So you could also write that instead of 66.6 repeating, you could write it as 66 and 6/9, which then simplifies to 66 and 2/3%. So either one of those is correct. So when you have a percent, you're going to move 2 to the left. So your decimal is 1.755. Now that you have that as a decimal, so it would be 1 and 755 over 1,000, which then can be simplified. If we divide the numerator by 5 and the denominator by 5, what do we get?
151 over 200.
Excellent. Thank you, Tiffany. So it's 1 and 151 over 200. The last little decimal point over here. When you see 0.01%, is that a decimal or a percent? It's a percent because it has a percent symbol, even though it looks like a decimal. How do I put that as a decimal? How do I make a percent into a decimal? You want to move away from the percent symbol, right? You want to move away from the percent symbol. So you're going to go 2 to the left. So that's 0.0001 as a decimal. Now, I'm going to show you the other way, which we talked a little bit ago, how you could go straight from a percent to a fraction. If you're having a difficult time remembering which direction to move the decimal point, and that idea of if you want to make a decimal, you're going to move away from the percent doesn't help. Then what you could do is you could actually write 0.01% as a fraction, and then whatever you do to the top, you do to the bottom in the sense of moving decimal points. You can't have a decimal fraction. So to get away from that decimal, you're going to move 2 to the right, which means you're going to move 2 to the right to this guy here, and you get 1 over 10,000. Okay? That's one way of doing the fraction. The other way of doing the fraction is to remember that when you are leaving the percent, you're literally going away 2 to the left. And then once you have that newfound decimal, what you're going to write is you're going to write the 1, because that's the important number, over, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4 place values. 4 place values. You don't count the zeros. You count the number of place values. There's 4 of them, so you need 4 zeros, which makes it 1/10,000. How do I change fractions into decimals? Divide. 7 divided by 8. And when you do 7 divided by 8, it's the same thing as punching in the calculator 7 divided by 8. And you get 0.875. Yeah. 0.875. How do I make that a percent? You want to create a percent symbol at the end, so you're going to move 2 towards where you would want it. That's 87.5%. How do I change 70 over 16 into a decimal? Divide. 70 divided by 16, what does it give you? 4.375. And it makes sense that it's bigger than 1 because 70 is a bigger number. It's an improper fraction.
So 437.5.
Exactly. 437.5%. 7/12. 7 divided by 12. 7 divided by 12. And you get? 0.58.
Would you do the
3. Sorry, 0.583. Yes, the 3 is repeating. Thank you. That's how you would write it as a decimal. And as a as a percent, you're going to move 2 to the right. So it's 58 the 3 repeats percent. You guys had a question on Math Space that asked you to increase a number by a specific percent.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at a question like this, you have to think about the idea that, first of all, if I want to increase 1900 by 10%, it means that my new number is going to be more than 1900. It's going to be 10% more. So the first thing you have to figure out is what 10% of 1900 is. So to set this up, you would say, if you go back to your relation map, your bridge map, the part is related to the whole in the same way that percent is related to 100. And in this case, I am trying to find the 10%, so that's 10% of 1900. I want to know what 10% of 1900 is. That means that 1900 is the whole, and I'm looking for the part. With that, when you find that x equals, that's telling you that that's the 10% you're going to increase it by. So when I cross multiply, you get 19,000 is equal to 100x. X is going to equal, after you divide by 100, exactly, 190. What is the 190?
That's how much is being added.
Yes. The 190 is the amount that you're adding to 1900. So if I was going to increase it by 10%, I'm actually going to be now, my new number is 2090. Because 2090 is 10% more than 1900. Now let's look at the questions that are going to be very similar to the ones on the test. It says solve using a percent equation. Well, a proportion can be an equation, so we're going to write those. This part here is the really important thing. It wants to know what 46% of 82 is. So initially, at the very beginning, 46% immediately goes there because it's 46%. The 82 is the whole thing that you're trying to find the part to. So when you cross multiply, you get 3,772 is equal to 100x. I divide by 100 like a regular equation, and I get that x is equal to 37.72. So, good. The percent, the whole thing is 3,750. 2.5 per 100. So that means that the unknown is the part. When you cross multiply, you get 9,375 is equal to 100n. When you divide everything by 100, you get that n is equal to 93.75. All right. The next question. The next question is actually a little bit of a tricky thing. because it's asking you to find 104% of something. It's asking you to find more than 100% of a number. So that means that my new number is going to be more than 2080. When I set this up, the no-brainer, hopefully, is the part that says 104%. So that means it's 104 per 100. You're taking it of 2080. Of 2080 is the amount out of. And then when you cross multiply, you get
This is different. This is an answer.
216320 is equal to 100n. And then when we divide by 100, you get that the answer to this question is 2163.20.
Wait.
For this guy here, for this one, it's asking us for what? What is it asking me for? The top one.
45. What percent?
Yes. So it's saying what percent. That means it's what percent. Correct? Now it says, and now that I set up the percent part, you can even scratch that out so you don't get confused. What's the other part going to be? Yes, 45 of 240. That means that 240 is the whole and 45 is the part. Bless you. Then when you do your cross multiplication, you're going to get 240 times n is equal to 4,500. And when you divide by 240, you get 18.75. All right. 81 is 9% of what number? Well, what is the one thing I can immediately set up with no problem?
81 is the part.
Yeah, it's 81 out of the total. I know for sure 9% is 9 per 100. So, yes, 81 out of what whole is the same as 9%? It says that 81 is 9% of some other number, and that other number is the whole thing. And when you cross multiply, you get 9n is equal to 8100. Now you do your regular one-step equation, and you get that n is equal to 900. And it makes sense that if you take a little bit, a 9% of a big number like 900, you're going to get a small number like 81. All right. Second to the last one. And these are all just like the test questions, you guys. So as long as you understand these, you're going to be totally good. 477 is 90% of what number? Well, 90%, I'm just going to put right there immediately. It's telling me that I am taking 90% of some number that I don't know. That means that must be the total, the whole. I took 90% of an unknown number, and 477 was the part, because it's 477 out of some number. That's where I get my proportion. 90n is equal to 47,700. And then when I divide by 90,
530.
you get 530. And again, put it back into the question to see if it makes sense. You had 530 and you took 90% of it. Or think of it in terms of questions on a test. There was a total of 530 questions. You got a 90%. That means that you got 477 correct. That makes sense. Okay, this last question is just like the word problem that you guys are going to see, and it's going to be important that you understand what it's asking for. Kind of like the very first question we did at the beginning. Shane found a pair of jeans on sale for $170. Okay, so in our head, we're finding that the 170 is the part of the whole thing. Because her friend told her that this number, the 170, was 85% of the whole original price. So that means that the original price is going to be more than 170. 85% is the same as 170, which was the part out of the total amount.
17,000.
And then you multiply 85 times n, and that's equal to 170 with 2 zeros, so 17,000. Divide by 85, and you get 200. And it makes sense that the original price was $200, and she only paid 85% of that price, which was $170. Okay, please make sure you guys review over the weekend. This video is going to be up on